Based off yet another one of the Warren's supernatural inquiries, in The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It, bloody hell that title, Ed and Lorraine Warren come to the aid of a young dude accused of murder who in court pleads not guilty by means of demonic possession. James Wan is a filmmaker that holds a very special place in my heart. It was actually the first two Insidious movies as well as the first two Conjuring movies that were the first horror movies I ever watched, which resulted in the love and fascination I have with the genre today. All of those films were directed by James Wan, so I know who to thank for getting me into horror. The first two Conjuring films in particular had a pretty profound impact on me, not just because of how genuinely terrifying the films are, as well as the honestly lovable characters, but because of the craft on display. Sure, both films do fall back on a lot of your typical horror movie tropes and cliches, but the finesse and the meticulous direction of those films really rises them above a lot of the mainstream horror movies we often receive even now. However, despite my verging on sycophantic love for both of those films, I was worried about The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It. Why is that title so long? While the horror movie cinematic universe is an idea that I absolutely adore, I haven't really liked many of the Conjuring universe films save for The Conjuring 1 and 2 and Annabelle Creation. That and this film isn't directed by James Wan. It's actually directed by Michael Chaves, who directed one of the previous Conjuring universe movies, The Curse of La Llorona, which isn't the worst in the franchise, but it's still pretty lackluster. Luckily though, I can say that I had a pretty good time with The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It. That title, honestly, felt pretty good watching a film in this universe that I actually enjoyed, as opposed to feeling like I had to be dragged to hell and back just to get to the end. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are once again amazing as Ed and Lorraine Warren. The human aspect is the heart and soul of this franchise and has always been one of my favourite parts of the first two Conjuring movies, and The Devil Made Me Do It doesn't disappoint in that regard. The chemistry between them, as per usual, is great, and their relationship is easily the sweetest and most heartwarming aspect of the film. What I really loved about this film was how it uses their relationship to boost the stakes and create suspense. Right from the opening scene, Ed Warren suffers a heart attack, and this health issue becomes a constant source of tension throughout the entire film, to the point where even a brisk jog through the woods could put him in the hospital. On top of that, Lorraine also feels a connection to the entity that they have to deal with in this film, and this demon has the power to control her and those around her and make them do things that they may not necessarily want to do, which also adds to the film's tension, which offers a lot of opportunities to take these characters in different directions, which the film exploits to the best of its ability. I also thought John Noble was really good in the film. Yeah, he basically plays the typical horror movie supporting character who knows a lot or is an expert on the things that the main characters are dealing with. However, it's a little deeper than that in this film, and because of that, Noble gets to do some really cool things with this character. He was very mysterious and very creepy. The film's pacing is also top-notch. It's a very fast-paced horror movie. Even when the story isn't quite as interesting as the stories in the first two movies, there's barely a boring scene. This isn't a great film though. I do have problems with it. For one, it doesn't feel as polished as the first two, which isn't to say that Michael Chaves does a bad job as director. On the contrary, he does a really good job with this movie. It may feel like a bit of a step down compared to the first two Conjuring movies, but for Chaves as a director, this is a huge step up from The Curse of La Llorona. It is a really handsome looking movie, and there are still a few well-crafted scares and sequences that are really intense. No, the film isn't as scary as the first two, but nonetheless there are still a few sequences that really stayed with me after I walked out of the cinema. Particularly a terrifying sequence that takes place in a morgue. That was amazing. And there's also a really suspenseful sequence inside an underground tunnel that was also really great. There is, however, an over-reliance on what is now the typical build-up to a jump scare where you know something is coming and then it does. All the Conjuring universe movies do it, even James Wan's films, which I thought did it best. Wan's really good at drawing the audience's attention to something and then subverting expectations by focusing on something else, and none of it was ever false. The Devil Made Me Do It does this this a few times, just not quite as well as 1 did. Which is why it's kind of impossible not to compare this film with the other 2 Conjuring movies, because James Wan brought such a refinement to those films that just isn't present in this film. I also don't think the story is as good as it could be. Obviously, because the film is based off of a true story, it has to relate to a specific horrific event from the Warrens' backstory, and I think this is the only film in this trilogy that feels trapped by that. As a few of you watching may know, the Devil Made Me Do It case was a real court case, and that court case is at the center of this film's story, so everything else happens around it. Although, because the entire case was centered around one horrific incident, the filmmakers have to stretch that somehow, and because of that, it feels like the movie is being restrained. While I found the stuff going on around the case to be pretty engaging, the case itself and the way this film portrays it just isn't that interesting, largely because of Arn Johnson, the defendant in the case. He's given the bare minimum characterization, sure, but for the most part, he just becomes the one character that this film occasionally cuts to add a few more scares. Interesting things happen to him, but he himself isn't that interesting. The Devil Made Me Do It case felt like something the filmmakers were cutting to because they had to, in order to maintain the idea that these movies are based on true stories, so it really just feels like the film includes the Devil Made Me Do It story because it's obligated to, and not to integrate it into the story in an interesting way. I found the Warrens taking on this entity to be a far more engaging storyline because of the mythology that they built around the villain, and that villain is really unique in a very unexpected way, and I couldn't get enough of it whenever the film was focusing on the Warrens and this antagonist, which messes with them in some very fucked up ways. But it feels rushed because the film has to revolve around this case, which restricts the film from going all out with its ideas, so as an unwanted side effect, other plot elements and characters feel underdeveloped. To me, it actually felt like the case's inclusion, despite its narrative significance, actually held the film back. Still, I can't deny that while this movie isn't as good as those first 2 movies in quite a few ways, again, it was never boring. I do think the script could have used another draft or 2 so that they could find a way to make the story a little more interesting than it turned out to be, but I still had fun watching this movie. It was well directed, some of the scares were well crafted, and there are a few suspenseful sequences. The acting is great, and I cared about some of the characters. Yes, it's a step down when compared to The Conjuring 1 and 2, but despite my issues with this movie, I can still look at The Devil Made Me Do It as a pretty alright addition to the trilogy and the Conjuring universe. Honestly, it just felt good to watch a movie in this universe that wasn't a total letdown for once. And on that note, The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It gets a 6.6 out of 10. Thank Christ I don't do triple digits. So that was my review of The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It. I do hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much as always for watching. Before I go though, I would just like to ask you guys, what did you think of The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It? Fucking title, why didn't you just call it The Conjuring 3? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was bad? Did you think it was somewhere in the middle? Please leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will indeed see you guys in the next one. Until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you. Always.